another concept that I've been working at for about the last few years that I think should transcend the focus on security. It's the concept of resilience. What we're focused on, first and foremost, is assuring the continuity of critical function, of critical need, and our own critical values in the face of disruptive risk. What we're trying to secure is not things. We're trying to essentially assure things that are important and critical to us. When you're focused on resilience, you're almost agnostic about the source of the risk. The disruptive risk could be because we don't maintain something well. It could be because, like we saw here in the Northeast here, Mother Nature blows in and decides to cause a lot of mischief. It can be because of accidents on human beings with complex independent systems that just go haywire from time to time. And it obviously can be malicious intent. Regardless of the source of the shock, the source of disruption, the key is how do we assure that its systems are critical, that we can have them continuously provide the service they provide. So I want to begin at the outset with essentially a focus on what I think we're doing wrong. This has become almost institutionalized in the federal bureaucracy. This idea that risk equals threat times vulnerability times consequence came out of 9/11. And why does this not work? Basically, are there people with malicious intent who are out there intent on causing mischief to a particular piece of infrastructure? If there is, then we go to stage 2. Is it vulnerable? Basically, would it be easy to do? And yes, okay, then stage 3, would it matter? When it comes to infrastructure, essentially basic problems with this approach. Infrastructure takes years to build, and we expect it to be around for decades. The time to actually thinking about safeguarding it is when you design it. So waiting until you have a threat, warning, they're after bridges. Oh, let's look at the bridge to see if it's vulnerable. In infrastructure, it really can't work because of the time frame issue. So what's a different approach? The start and off point when thinking about infrastructure is not about the infrastructure, but is the service, the need the infrastructure provides. What is the critical needs that we have? What are the critical services? Well, we know basically from transportation to mobility. That's a critical need to make a modern society work. We also know we need energy, because that powers everything we do. What's the system that provides that need? That's where infrastructure kicks in. That's where a network or system kicks in. And then we need to understand that system. We map it out. Again, I'm not talking about threat here. We're starting at the basics. What is the system? What is the network that provides the critical service? And then once we have that, then we go into this process saying, well, what could disrupt it? What are the things that, if it's critical, we don't want to disrupt it? We want to ensure its continuity. What would those disruptive risks be? And some of them are rather mundane. We don't maintain it. We don't upgrade it. We have accidents. If the system is critical, we have to put it through what if scenarios, including a worst case scenario. One that's not, necessarily meteor hitting Earth, though, by the way, one came pretty close if you heard about that news here recently. But basically, scenarios that have a certain bound of probability that would be profoundly consequential they put out, that would truly stress the system. We're moving away from protecting assets to actually assuring continuity of the function the assets provide. We need interdisciplinary focus to deal with this. Resilience for emergency management typically is just bouncing back. Resilience for structural engineers is designing into the system to withstand the force. But the key here is this notion of robustness, the ability to absorb shocks and continue operating. It seems to me for forecastable risk, we should have tried to do that. Resourcefulness. Some we're going to face with unknowns or worst case scenarios, which you really can't build too much for. Rapid recovery. The goal is to get the system is knocked down, back up on its feet as quickly as possible. And the last is this adaptability. We've got to learn from this process. Every time something gets knocked down, we shouldn't just put Humpty Dumpty back together again. We're going to think about, based on that experience, what can we do to redesign the system because the risk is likely to come back again. And this is basically a cycle. Resilience isn't a component. It's the overarching imperative. What is threat? Threat is always a mix of intent and capability. The French have nuclear weapons. We're not losing sleep tonight because the French have nuclear weapons. Why not? They have capability. We happily know they don't have intent. There are people with intent, they have no capability. What makes a threat is when I have intent and capability. It takes a lot of capability if a system is robust, if it's resilient, to knock it out. And that means the amount of people out there who can threaten it we've shrunk that universe. Seize the opportunity like post-Sandy can provide to redesign the system to actually make it better than it was when it started. Why is it critical? This is the water supply for the 7th largest economy in the world. This is the reservoir for the Central Valley of California, which is 45% of all the vegetables and fruits for the nation, and basically keeps 28 million people hydrated. And all of these are essentially leveed islands. There are 57 of them with basically all below sea level, with berms around them. 60 miles to the west, we have San Francisco Bay, and that's salt water. Salt water and fresh water, you want to keep those separate. Almost certainly by 2015, the ground will move at a Richter scale of 6.8, and that will be enough to essentially liquefy the peat, soil, and sand. And San Francisco Bay, with all that salt water, will go, I'm coming. We'll now have a brackish lake for the water supply for the 7th largest economy in the world. This is going to happen. So how could you fix this problem? If you know the damn things are going to fail, not even with the earthquake, I mean, just the burrowing animals and other things. The bottom line here is when we're thinking about resilience, we're not just thinking about full-scale infrastructure changes like the perimeter canal might offer up, but we're also thinking about process, or thinking about just mitigation standards that we can put in place. We're opening up all those for conversation. It could be essentially how we do operations, or it can be how we do a system design. If basically the flood control system in Sacramento fails, 17 feet of water fill up the streets of Sacramento. This was an important building and structure for them, so they built the building to essentially be above this worst case scenario. How come 100 plus years ago, you could think about designing into buildings for things you would worry about, and we seem to have lost that art?